Jesus' new nourishing nugget at noon. Today is episode 16. Yeah, baby. All right, today is about how the Spirit dwells in you. Let me go ahead and kind of recap these last few. In episode 15, we talked about how saints are in the Spirit. And then in episode 14, we talked about how you belong to Him. And so, really, those are all the culmination of our main verse we've been looking at, which is Romans chapter 8, verse 9. Here it is. He says, however, you are not in the flesh, but you are in the Spirit, if indeed the Spirit of God dwells in you. Now, that's the word we're looking at today. He says, but if anyone does not have the Spirit of Christ, he does not belong to Him. So again, it's His Spirit. We have to be born of the Spirit, born from above, what Jesus was talking about there in John chapter 3, verse 3, taking you back as well to our John 14, verse 20 passage. In that day, when the Spirit comes in that day, you will know that I'm in the Father, you are in me, and I am in you. And you can just see so much here as we get back to our last three messages. You belong to Him. You're saints in the Spirit. You're not in the flesh. You're in the Spirit. You're in a new domain. And then, of course, the Spirit dwells in you. So when we look at that Romans 8:9 passage, what's interesting about this word to dwell is that we have another word that Jesus used in actually John 14. You can look at verses 1 and 2 and also verse 23. But it's just essentially referring to the abode of God. Let me go ahead and read that. We got John 14, verses 1 and 2. He says, Jesus speaking, let not your heart be troubled. Believe in God. Believe also in me. Twice there on belief. Belief's important. In my Father's house are many dwelling places. Okay, that's the word monē there. That's the word for abode. He says, in my Father's house are many dwelling places or many abodes. If it were not so, I would have told you, for I go to prepare a place for you. So my view is that when Jesus is going to the death, burial, and resurrection, He's going to prepare our hearts as the lovely dwelling place of Him. And so you've got John 14, verse 23 there as kind of a summary. Jesus says, if anyone loves me, he will keep my word. That's to believe and to love. John talked about that in 1 John 3, verse 23. He says, if anyone loves me, he will keep my word, and my Father will love him, and we will come to him and make our abode with Him. That's that lovely dwelling place. Now, if you go to John 15, you're going to see a lot in the pre-cross gospel of John here. You're going to see that word abide being used, and that word abide is the verb. Jesus wanted His disciples to abide because as they followed Him to the regeneration of the Son of Man, there would come a day at Pentecost when they would believe, and then the Spirit would come into them, and they would become the abode of God. And so that's what was being talked about there in John 14, verses 1 and 2, again, verse 23. And also, if you go into John 15, when Jesus is saying in verse 5 there, He says, apart from me, you can do nothing. We apply that abide to like the Christian life, but it's really a pre-cross message where He's like, apart from me, apart from abiding in me, you can do nothing. You're not going to be able to spiritually birth yourself from above. You must abide in me. That abide is another word for, again, our 8 words for believe. You got believe, receive, confess, obey, abide, rest is another word. You could use the word subject. You got the word repent, 8 words there. And so, yes, you're going to need to do that. Now, let me take you to, this was kind of prophesied about in Psalms 84. Let me tell you about that. He says, how lovely are your dwelling places. My soul longed and even yearned for the courtyards of the Lord. My heart and my flesh sing for joy to the living God. The birds also found a house, and the swallow a nest for herself where she may put her young. Your altars, Lord of armies, my King and my God. He says, blessed are those who dwell in your house. They are ever praising you. Listen to this one. Blessed is the person whose strength is in you, in whose heart are the roads to Zion. So see, that lovely dwelling place, that's what Jesus was coming to do. That's what He was going to prepare a place for. So now let's go back to Romans chapter 8, verse 9. And we have here this word for dwell, and it's fascinating because it's actually a different word than Monet, that word for the abode of God. It's still meaning the same thing, but it's just a little bit more practical. That word there is oikos. It's Greek word number 3611. This is the word we're looking at, guys, in Romans 8:9, where he says, if indeed the Spirit of God dwells in you. So that word dwells, if he dwells in you, that's a verb. Okay, so this would be consistent to maybe like the word abide, or abide, not obide, but abide. And so this word means it's a house, a dwelling, and inhabitation. Properly, it's to make a home. It's living at home comfortably, because it's one's residence to be at home. And so again, just kind of an interesting little situation there of how that's word used. We're going to look at 6 uses here, and then we'll be done for the day. Again, we're looking at this word, Greek word number 3611. We dwell, and of course, so we dwell in him. We're living in him. This is that zeo, the living, the verb of the noun zoe. We're dwelling. And so notice how this word's used in Romans 7:17. He says, so now no longer am I the one doing it, but sin which dwells in me. So see, before Paul was, when he was Saul, when he was in Adam, he had sin, the noun, and it was dwelling in him. See, you go to that core part of the heart. It's wretched, it's evil, it's wicked, it's beyond cure, it's the rotten fig. And so I know a lot of the Romans 7s, the saints identify with Romans 7, that Romans 7 verses 14 through 25. But really, Paul is talking about his prior life when he was Saul, when he was in Adam. Sin, the noun, unbelief, the noun, cannot dwell in him as a saint. He's been removed from that. We've been removed from that domain of darkness. And so again, so now no longer am I the one doing it, but sin which dwells in me. Paul saw that, or Saul there at the time, saw that sin, the noun, was dwelling in him. Next verse, he says, for I know that nothing good dwells in me, that is, in my flesh. And so see there again, you can see that word good. That's the word for goodness, God's character, his nature, his DNA, right? Here you can see here, Paul's not created in righteousness and holiness of the truth. He's like, nothing good dwells in me. And of course, that is in my flesh. And so that whole nature of being in Adam, all that spiritual death, that was the problem that, of course, the law was stirring up sins, because Paul was under the law. And so here's another use by Paul in Romans 7:20. He says, but if I'm doing the very thing I do not want, I am no longer the one doing it, but sin that dwells in me. So again, it's sin. It's the noun that's dwelling in Paul when he's speaking to that. Now we get to our verse here, Romans 8:9. He says, however, you are not in the flesh. See, he's no longer in the flesh. We could go to Romans 7:5 again. While you were in the flesh, the sinful passions which were aroused by the law were at work in the members of your body to bear fruit for death. That word work there, that's that word energio we looked at. There was a power, it was sin that was working in you to produce nothing but death. And so that's no longer the situation. Why? Because the Spirit of God now dwells in you. And so that's that verb. The Spirit is dwelling in you. So if you do not have the Spirit of Christ, then you do not belong to him. Again, our use there that we looked at last week in number 14, episode number 14. He says, verse 11, but if the Spirit of him who raised Jesus from the dead dwells in you, and he does, he who raised Christ Jesus from the dead will do what? He will give life to your mortal bodies through his Spirit who dwells in you. So there again, we see the Zoe life, Greek word number 2222, providing the living, the zeo of the Zoe. And that's all happened now because we've been raised from the dead, and the Spirit of Jesus, the Spirit of him who was raised from the dead, he now dwells in you. So See, Paul had to lay out that you're not under law, and now the Spirit's in you, and now we're going to be living by the Spirit. It's living from the Spirit. He gets into this debate in Galatians chapter 3. You've been born from above, Were you born of the Spirit or through the law? And he's like, no. We don't perfect the flesh through the law. The perfecting of the flesh, any sort of improvement as we live by faith, happens in, by, and through the Spirit. He who began the good work then perfects us. He's perfecting our soulish experience. He's not perfecting your heart. He's not perfecting your spirit. He's perfecting your soulish experience as you live in that energy of the divine nature and the power of the Spirit within you. And so the summary of all this is 1 Corinthians 3, verse 16. And Paul's asking this question early on. Now, again, remember, we got the most immature church on the planet. And Paul's going to take the time to remind them there's all kinds of divisions and factions. Their focus, their interest is probably set more on man than it is on God. And there's all sorts of just immorality and impurity, all sorts of things happening in this church. And what does Paul say in 1 Corinthians 3:16? He says, do you not know? Here's another one of those, do you not know? That's in Romans 6:3, do you not know? In Romans 7:1, do you not know? Here's another, do you not know? Do you not know that you are a temple of God and that the Spirit of God dwells in you? This is exactly what was being said to the Samaritan woman. There's coming a day. If you knew who I was, you'd ask for me to drink from me, and I would give you water to drink that's living water, where you would never hunger, you never thirst. You don't have to worship in a mountain or in a temple. Why? You're now the temple of God. Isn't that awesome? So, all right, guys. Hey, tomorrow we're going to talk about how the Spirit brings liberty in episode number 17. This is Mark with Jesus New Covenant Academy. Thanks for joining.